Fred Waugh, between you and me there is an I. Between two stools, the hyphen lies, the eggs in the nest, the blind in the fold, the hinge of the city, the door and the jam, the map and its edges, the wars I've not fought, the life and its lease, the rope but which end, the brink and disaster, the bank and the laughter, the spike below Chinaman's Peak, that spot where the two rails meet. From between two stools, hear the silence rise, the smoke round your neck, the tongue in the dash, the cat in the cradle, the dog dead in the creek, the slash and the burn, the shadows of NAFTA, the head and the tax, rock bluff and river, the laundry its mark, the height and the trestle, cata and strophe, not caboose, but what's after. Fred Waugh.
Waugh?
Waugh, one of the great poets. Okay, well, what the heck is he doing? Who wants to start us off on the title, Between You and Me There Is an I? Take a stab at it. You can take a stab at it. Magdalena, can you take a stab at it? Try to translate that into plain English. It's hard, isn't it?
Yes. It's.
How about this? Can I? Go ahead.
It makes me think that I remember when learning English, it was when you enumerate people, that it's important not to say like me in the first place, like the order in which.
Not between me and you, between you and me.
You, yes, and why does this caught my attention. Why we started with you, and then there's me, and there's I. So, why in this particular order?
That's a good question.
The first question would come to mind.
Can we literally, if we sketched it, and we don't have a board, we're not going to sketch it, but if we sketched it, we have a you and a me and an I. What is the title saying is the location of the I?
Between two people.
Well, between a you and a me. And what would it mean to say there's an I between a you and a me? Because that's weird. It should be there. It should be someone else is between you and me, but it's the I.
It's an obstacle or impediment between you and me. You.
But why would an I
You
be the
and
obstacle
me
between you and me?
Is usually together. So if there's an I between you and me, something's coming
Between you and me is not usually together. I mean, if it's me and Orrin Hatch, there is no together.
I felt.
No, please.
I felt it was sort of like the you and me. It's like pointing. It's like referential. It's like you, me, and then for identity, it's what's actually created. The I is in the middle between the 2 points. It's like how you see me, how I see me. You.
So
Okay.
perception.
Yeah, exactly.
But wait a
So,
minute.
well,
Me, if I say between you and me there is an I, me and I are the same person, technically
No.
speaking.
No, because me is more the object. It's something seen, pointed at. It's not the actual being. And how is it being created? It's
Let's try this another way. If I say between you and me, what have I said?
It's like something, like a secret. Like
Confidential.
Jose goes to between you and me.
Between you and me.
Al's being really annoying.
So Fred,
right, between you and me. It's just the two of us.
Fred Waugh is full of double meanings. His writing is always just so full of double meanings. So he's using the idiomatic sense of between you and me. So he's saying, between you and me, there is an I. If it's that, what does it mean? I got something to tell you. There's an I. What would that mean, Deanna?
Well, I guess this assertion of there's an I, so that's saying, like we were talking about in our home talk earlier today, like the assertion that I am here, a sort of assertion of presence.
Yeah. I-ness is a speaker, a subjectivity. So it is, in a way, saying, there is an I. There is an I. Yes, identity. There is an identity. Now, we had this earlier conversation which does something very complicated. It says there is a you and a me, and in between them is an I. Now, that I could be someone else's subjectivity, not the subjectivity of the me. Augusto?
Yeah, what I think is, I think nobody knows he or herself totally. So between you and me, there is an I. Or I'm not totally honest with you. Not even for me. With me, I mean, it's like I can show myself to you as one person that I am not. Because there's nobody is really true, you know? Because in society, you have to assume positions, you know? For instance, or you are the executive, you are the husband, you are the wife, and these are different people. So between you and me, there's an I. So there is something that is hidden.
So we have a problem that starts the poem by the title. There's either three entities, a you and a me, and in terms of a poet, that could be the writer and the reader, right? A subject and object. And possibly a third identity, an I, or it could be subjectivity itself. But then the poem comes along and is a fabulous riffing of twos. Egg, nest, blind, fold, hinge, city, door, jam, map, edges. Wars we'll leave alone for a second. Life and lease. Rope that has ends, one end and another. Brink, disaster, bank, laughter. And so on. Lots of twos. And there's a betweenness. But the first two lines present a whole question of how, remember this is a poem so far according to us about identity. The first two lines, Deanna, between two stools, the hyphen lies. Why hyphen?
Well, I think the hyphen probably has a lot to do with Fred's identity as a Chinese Canadian writer. So the hyphen is what's between those two sets of identities, his Chinese heritage and his status as a Canadian.
You're kind of a ringer in the sense that you are the manager of the Fred Waugh archive, and you know Fred Waugh well, and you also share that question of identity with him.
Yeah, because we're both Chinese Canadians who don't necessarily look very Chinese, but we both have Chinese last names, and so it's a way that we're always signaled as being sort of split between these two identities.
So what does hyphenation mean?
Well, it's something that joins at the same time as separates, right? So, it's kind of, in a sense, hybridity. It makes a sort of hybrid of two things coming together, but also is a division.
Right. So may we continue in this for another minute?
Of course.
And then we'll open it up. If the poem is trying to explore what identity means, what better a way, Deanna, than to do the less obvious thing? If in fact, Fred Waugh, the poet, the speaker, is trying to examine his ethnic identity, his identity by virtue of background, what better a way to do it than not to talk about ethnicity at all, but to examine all kinds of hyphenations? For instance, the hyphenation between the egg and the nest. What is that? And once Deanna does the first one, we're going to have a fun time looking at the different hyphenations and trying to figure out how the you and me, the one and the other, relate through hyphenation. How about door and jam? Okay, in the context that Deanna has helped us understand, it's a major theme in Fred Waugh's poetry. Between you and me, there is an I. The door and the jam. How does hyphenation work there?
To me,
Carol?
it's sort of a synergy.
Yeah, one needs the other.
It stands on its own, but together there's something more.
So it's not opposite,
No.
right? It's not opposites.
It's
not yin yang, black white. It's
two
door
things
and
that
jam.
stand alone, but also work together.
Work together. That's exactly what I was thinking of. Work together. How about brink and disaster, Anna? Brink and disaster. How's that hyphenation work?
Well, the common expression would be something on the brink of disaster, like brink of disaster, like a really bad thing that's about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So to talk about the space between brink and disaster is really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool, but I want you to explain it a little further.
Well, I guess I would say to kind of continue on Carol's thread, you can think about the brink of something standing on its own, right? The idea of brink as being like an edge or like a marginal liminal space.
Yep.
Disaster, who knows what that could be? It could be environmental disaster, it could be personal disaster, it could be anything. So putting a sort of hyphenation of that space, like a brink doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing, but disaster is pretty much always a bad thing. So having us inhabit that absolutely liminal space, and inviting us to think of that other preposition or the other preposition of brink of disaster.
Okay, you ready for this now?
Hit me.
Between brink and disaster, there is an I.
Right. It's how do you actually put yourself like grammatically in relation of the actual, because so much of this list is playing with idiomatic phrases.
Yes.
And flipping them either flipping them around or just like putting space between them. So putting an I between the brink and disaster puts the speaker of this poem in a grammatical relation to all of these phrases, in addition to like maybe a more perilous one.
If between you and me is a pun on confidentiality, hey, between you and me, then the metapoetic reading, which is that the you and me is the poet Fred Waugh and the me of the reader, or the other way around. But the point is, if we are receiving this message, where is the I? If this is poet and reader, where's the I?
I have a rather odd and my own personal interpretation here. As a poet, it's a list poem,
It is in a lot of ways a list poem.
all the different thous. And to me, it reads like a list of the things that are between you and me. And if I think what little I know of Fred Waugh, I read a little bit the other day, and he was trying to explore his identity as a dual cultural person. The you and the me could actually be both part of his I, one being his Chinese side, one being his...
That's such a good reading. In other words, my identity is going to be between a you that's me and a me that's me.
Mhm.
That's where I am. I'm an in-between. That's his definition of hyphenation. You just made it so clear.
Like he can't be completely Canadian because of the way the Chinese were treated when the railroad was being built, and that's a conflict. So does he identify as Canadian? Does he identify as Chinese? All these things stand between understanding exactly what his identity is.
But his mother was Swedish as well. Well, as far as I can...
Yeah. So if you think about the two ethnic identity selves as, in one case, like the blind in the fold, in another case, like the door in the jam, there are as many ways of thinking about the relationship of the parts of the hyphenation as there are dualities that the poet can spin out. Which is that is true multiculturalism, in the sense that multiculturalism isn't just, as I understand it, isn't just acceptance of the varieties, but is the multi-perspectival approaches to the way two can always be formulated in relation to each other. And what does that better than a poem? Mm-hmm. Especially a poem that's a list poem. I do think that what's after is analogous to The Edge, right? And I think Fred Waugh is trying to understand the contestation between the map, which is what the official geographical definition of a nation is, continent, and what's at the edges. And I think he sees his ancestry as at the edge, but then suddenly it's on the map. As it were, there's a nice idiom, right? You're on the map, meaning you're part of it now.
Or what's underneath the map, because I mean, it was all native land to begin with. I mean, they just really went through the map.
Yeah. Fred Waugh's poetry is writing that I admire tremendously because he's constantly taking up the question of what the tongue does and is, right? And no one is better at writing in English, but no one is also more agonized than Fred about what English means and what the use of it is suppressing. The tongue and the dash is really an important moment in this poem. And so is kata and strophe. Which is, catastrophe is not really related to the strophe of a poem, but it becomes metapoetic there. Deanna, your thoughts?
Okay, I'm going back to Dash now that I've had
Yeah.
10 seconds to think about
Yeah.
it. Fred is just so deliberate with his word choices, and he's really always chooses words that signify in multiple directions, so that's never, it's like, can open up many possibly contradictory readings. So thinking about the dash, I mean, we can think of dash as both like a sort of violent verb, we can think about the dash as a kind of hyphen, and we can think about the dash as a kind of furtive movement. And so, I think there's a way in which sort of standardized English becoming a sort of linguistic standard and standardizing English. And I'm thinking also of Roy Kyoka's, used to write English with a lowercase I, because, that's the kind of English he thought he spoke, it being inflected with his sort of...
You mean the first person pronoun, Roy Kyoka would use a lowercase I?
Whenever he wrote English, he wrote it with a lowercase I.
Oh,
See, that was
English,
the-
Inglish.
Yes, and Fred's written about a lot about Roy and vice versa, so I've got that in my mind.
Yeah.
But the ways in which English can sort of, commit violence against other sort of linguistic expressions, not, other languages. But then also, I think, in Fred's playful way, the dash is also that, that there's something sort of furtive about that can always escape that violence that is always has a sort of expressive potential to it too. So I think it's signifying maybe in both ways in that sense.
One more final thought?
I was taken by that line, the wars I've not fought, to also be sort of like intergenerational, like the trauma is intergenerational. So whether you're a survivor of a war or a horrific act, it affects the next generation of children, and how and also it doesn't end necessarily with one generation. It continues, like either with the residential schools, we're still they're still struggling with that whole history, with, and also history itself, how history is taught. Like, is it even still taught? Like the idea that the railroads were a great thing. Well, there was a lot that was bad about it too. Like,
He's certainly
is
saying
it taught? Is it just taught in schools? Like, this is a great moment for our country. Well, what about who built the? Because there was a old. I heard older generations say, "We built this country." Well, who is we? Like white English, descendants? Like, you didn't build this country. Did you build the railroad? Like, and so it's frustrating that sometimes it doesn't work. And even, I think it's still telling now, like how we have to, I don't know, with all the immigration issues that are happening, how those stories get told.
It's a really good note to end on, because it gets us to that last line again. not caboose, but what's after, in a way, to translate what you just said in relation to that last line. The train is past. You know, the transcontinentalism is done, the caboose is down the road, but there's more work to be done. What's more important is what's after that story, the post-history. And that's really what he's talking about. Thank you all. You've done a marvelous job. Give yourself snaps. Thank you so much. You can't snap, but you're doing the snapping kind of thing.